Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Nadia DeSanti. I'm the project manager for this project on behalf of WSP. So we are the firm that's been contracted by the City of Cornwall to work on the zoning bylaw review project. A couple of housekeeping matters. We will be recording this presentation. We'll also be taking some photographs. Ooh, sorry, this is really sensitive. Woo. Okay. If you do not want your photo taken, please just raise your hand or inform the photographer. The exits are through the main doors here, and there's one on each side, and the washrooms are out. Women's to the right, my right, and men's to the left. So our presentation will be about 20-25 minutes, 30 minutes. Then we are available to answer any questions one-on-one. I firstly want to ensure that you've all signed in, that you all have a little door prize ticket. We'll be making a draw at 6 right after this presentation, and then at 6:30. I'd like to thank the City of Cornwall Economic Development and Planning Department for those door prizes. Also, the city has provided water, coffee, and some Timbits. And with that, I want to introduce my team, my colleagues. Anita Sott is a senior planner with us, and Casper Koblau. Casper is a bilingual planner. So for anyone who would like to ask questions or require explanation in French, Casper is available to provide that information en français, as well as Ellie at the registration table and Carl Doyle in the blue shirt and glasses, who's a senior planner with the City of Cornwall. Sorry. Can everyone see it? Maybe we're gonna see if we can turn off some of the lights. And can everyone hear me okay? Maybe too well? Okay. So tonight's meeting, and I want to also advise that we encourage people to come even with children. We always have a kids table for those kids. If you're at the table or you'd like to come there, that's fine too. You can start coloring. So we do want to encourage parents, guardians, any caregivers to be engaged in the project and not to worry about children. So bring them, so hopefully you can share that with your friends and family to say anytime we have a public open house, we have something for the kids to participate with, and they all love Timbits too, right? So tonight's is the first public open house of many. It's to formally launch the zoning bylaw review project and to explain to you what is a zoning bylaw, how does it impact you. You may be a business owner, you may be a landowner, you may be thinking about buying land or developing. That is really the tool that is used to develop a piece of property. And we want to hear your input. So we like to make our community events fun. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm gonna have to practice with this microphone. Sorry, that wasn't part of my duties today. So a couple of things. We have a comment sheet at the registration table. There are also some on the tables in front of you with pens. We have plenty of pens. So we would like you to feel free to put your comments on there. We also have the city's existing zoning bylaw schedule map. And beside it, we have a board where if you want to input your thoughts on sticky notes, we'll have someone there to help engage in that discussion too. So there's different ways of providing input, and we really want to hear from you. We can only make the city zoning bylaw project as good as we can with and from the people who live here. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So we're going to get into what is a zoning bylaw. Anita's going to present that information. And why do we have to review it? Why does the city have to review it? We're going to explain our engagement process, the opportunities for the community to get involved, and some of the key zoning issues that we've received from the city. We have a technical advisory committee that is part of this project, and they will be integral into providing input, providing comments. We'll also speak to the next steps, when you'll see us again, when we'll hopefully see you and others, and where to find the existing zoning for your property. We have a board that also helps with that, and how you can stay involved. So this image is really just how you as a public member are fit into this whole process. So again, it's very integral, it's collaborative. The zoning bylaw review, that's the deliverable, that's the project. We have the city, ourselves, and I mentioned the Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC. There are some members here who are part of that committee. And the TAC consists of various city staff members from the building department, planning department, engineering, transportation, parking. We also have someone from the accessibility department from the city of Cornwall. We have the Conservation Authority. We have the Cornwall Construction Association. We have a member here tonight. The Cornwall and District Real Estate Board, as well as Heart of the City. So we're really bringing in all aspects: natural environment, economic development, developers, a construction association, and bringing them all together, because that is all components of our city and our community building. So I'm going to turn it over to Casper, who will speak in English, but again is available to answer any questions or provide any information in French. So he'll explain what is a zoning bylaw, what it means, and then Anita will get into some of the specific issues that we have heard to date and would like to obtain more. So Casper.
Thank you, Nadia. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. So what is a zoning bylaw? Why are we here? How can this be so important? Well, the zoning bylaw affects all of us. It is a legal document that implements the policies of the official plan, the community's official plan, and is also consistent with provincial policy and is prepared in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. This diagram is intended to illustrate the planning policy and regulatory framework in Ontario. So as I mentioned, we have the zoning bylaw at the bottom, which is really the implementing document. And then you have the higher level policies that are both created by the municipality and the province, as well as specific requirements that are set out in the Planning Act. One of the main purposes of a zoning bylaw is to avoid land use conflicts as well. So making sure that noxious land uses are adequately separated from sensitive land uses like residential or institutional land uses like schools and things of that nature. The city's current zoning bylaw was prepared in 1969 and is required to be updated within 3 years of a new official plan coming into effect. The city's current official plan was adopted by council in October 2017 and approved by the province of Ontario in April 2018. So it is required to be updated at this time. So more specifically, getting into sort of the nitty-gritty of a zoning bylaw, the zoning bylaw sets out standards for how a property can be used and developed. Specifically, it includes a series of land use zones. So for example, residential, commercial, industrial, and that's all illustrated on zoning bylaw schedules. And we have an image of that over by the boards if you'd like to see. So it sets out the types of uses and buildings that can be established in each of these zones. So for example, single detached houses or semi-detached houses, all the way to high rises, commercial buildings, institutionals, buildings. Additionally, it sets out where a building can be placed on a property, so what setbacks are required from the street, requirements for lots themselves, so minimum lot widths, depths, and areas, as well as setbacks from the street, as I mentioned, as well as water bodies. The zoning bylaw also sets out maximum heights for different types of buildings and different types of zones. It sets out parking requirements to ensure that new land uses provide adequate parking and that there aren't parking shortages. And it also sets out landscaping requirements. So, for example, minimum amount of pervious surface. So, sort of, as I mentioned, so why are we reviewing the zoning bylaw at this time? Well, it's required to be reviewed to be in conformity with the city's new official plan. We need to really, as I mentioned, our current zoning bylaw is from 1969, so you can imagine that there's all kinds of updates that are required just to sort of bring it to current state of practice, to make sure that the definitions and the provisions are contemporary and they make sense, they're understandable, and that it's a user-friendly document. We'd also like to review site-specific exceptions, which may no longer be relevant, as well as I mentioned, improve the user-friendliness and the clarity. So looking at the review process, the red star on this graphic indicates where we are today. So we are at the very beginning of this process. So the real purpose of today's, or one of the purposes of today's meeting is to really formally launch the process. So on the left hand, the green boxes indicate the various engagement events. So as you can see, there are numerous engagement events that'll be occurring over the next year or so, where we'd like to get as much of your input as possible. In addition, you can see in the blue boxes the various deliverables or milestones that we're going to be preparing. And we'll be sharing with you at the engagement events. For example, at the next public open house, we'll be sharing our discussion paper. After that, there will be a technical advisory committee meeting, or a number of them, TAC meetings. There'll be another public open house, and actually 5 public open houses in total. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Anita Sott, who's going to talk a little bit about the key zoning issues.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I'm a little shorter than the previous presenters. So the next few slides, I'll share with you a series of preliminary items that we've discussed with city staff and members of our technical advisory committee in terms of considering what changes need to be made to the zoning bylaw. And firstly, we'll be reviewing the actual format of the physical document and the layout of it and the flow and how it's set out so that it can be as user-friendly as possible for most persons, and that includes accessibility considerations. So we're going to be looking at limiting the number of provisions that require the user, whether it's city staff or a property owner, to jump between sections of the document, because this can be confusing and you can find yourself missing provisions that may apply to your property. We'd like to enhance the document with visual illustrations to help visualize some of the provisions or the technical requirements for development. So for example, this could include illustrating all the various types of yards that are located on a property, and these are delineated by setbacks. So an illustration would show something similar to what is the top right here, where your home is, for example, what your front yard is, your side yard, and your rear yards. And that will help you interpret what the setback requirements are for each yard. We will also look at potentially creating some overlays. There's an existing zone called the Environmental Constraint Zone, which really represents floodplains from the water bodies in the municipality. And we will consider changing this to an overlay to enable city staff to make updates to the floodplain mapping more easily in the zoning bylaw as they're made available by agencies such as the Conservation Authority. And we'll also review the overall format for accessibility for the average person and people that may need assistance. So this includes using a very clear font style and size, using plain language. Planning and zoning can be full of jargon, so we will endeavor to make it as simple and user-friendly as possible, and we will do our best to avoid any acronyms. The zoning bylaw is divided into a series of sections. The first section is definitions. So this is really your glossary, your index for all of the terminology that is used throughout the zoning bylaw. And importantly, the definition section should include a definition for every land use that is outlined as being permitted throughout the zones. So we will be looking at this section and scrutinizing whether changes need to be made to revise or delete definitions for land uses that no longer exist or their terminology is out of date given the age of the bylaw. For example, the bylaw currently refers to single-family dwellings, and this is just simply not a modern term. It's now referred to as single detached to recognize that relationship and family status doesn't have any bearing on dwelling types. We'll also be removing performance standards, so provisions such as setbacks and other requirements that are sort of buried in some of the definitions, again, as a way to streamline for the reader of the document to not have to flip between definitions and wonder if they're missing certain provisions that may apply to their property. And we will review all of the permitted land uses under each zone and ensure that they all have a definition. As the bylaw is now, there are some definitions that are missing. The next section in the bylaw is called general provisions, and these are requirements or guidelines that apply to all properties regardless of what zone they're in. So we will be reviewing things like provisions for accessory apartments. There's been some changes to legislation over the years which are reflected in the city's official plan, but that terminology has changed. The province is referring to them as additional residential units, and you may also have heard the term secondary dwelling units. We will review the need to permit or not tiny homes. So we'd like to hear your input on that this evening, if you feel any which way about it. Should they be permitted, and if so, where specifically in the municipality? Where would they be appropriate? What types of residential areas? We will review commercial pop-up shops, as we've heard from city staff that these types of temporary commercial uses are seeking to establish themselves temporarily in places like parks and in vacant lands as an interim use. We'll also be reviewing driveway and parking requirements to make sure that they're following modern best practices, and this is particularly in residential areas. And this is really to help balance sort of the tension between required parking and on-street parking and some of the traffic issues that certain neighborhoods are experiencing. And we will also be reviewing the need for buffering between incompatible land uses or potentially incompatible land uses. For example, industrial areas that are located immediately adjacent to residential areas. How can we help mitigate those land use differences through things like landscaping or berming or noise control, those types of ideas. In terms of site-specific areas of the city where we're going to have a focus, city staff have asked us specifically to have a look at the Vincent Massey Drive corridor. So it's currently zoned for highway commercial uses, and the city also implemented a recent zone called Community Commercial Shopping Center, which sort of reflects the more big box commercial and retail section of Vincent Massey. And as it's no longer used as a main entry point into the city, replaced by Highway 417 and 401, we'll be looking at whether the highway commercial zone is appropriate for that section of Vincent Massey in terms of its current character, how the city envisions that the road will evolve, and what types of uses should be permitted there. We'll also be reviewing zoning for properties that may not conform to the 2018 official plan, which sets out land use designations in terms of where residential, commercial, institutional, industrial land uses should be located in general. and we'll be taking a deep dive into zones that have, or properties that have more than one zone applicable on one lot, or what we're calling dual zoning. So you may hear us refer to dual zoning throughout this process. It's the city's preference and generally best practice to limit the number of instances of dual zoning in a municipality on lots, as it's both more difficult for staff to administer the zoning requirements, and it can also be confusing for the property owner when they propose a development that straddles two zones, which provisions apply depending on the use, and it often leads to a property owner's needing to seek minor variances or zoning bylaw amendments. Under each specific zone, we will be reviewing all of them to determine if any revisions are needed to conform to the official plan specifically. We'll also be reviewing how the zones are named. Currently, there are some zones, such as residential, that are numbered 10, 15, 20, 30, so on, which sort of follow increases in density and the types of dwelling units or dwelling types that are permitted. And other zones have names which don't follow the same nomenclature. Under each zone, we'll also be reviewing what are called performance standards. So this is what Casper referred to in terms of building height, setback requirements in terms of meters from a street or your neighbor's lot line, densities, setbacks, lot sizes, and lot occupancy, which is the percentage of your lot that can be occupied by a structure or your main dwelling. And then we'll also be comparing the existing provisions to some of the minor variance trends that the city has been experiencing. So when property owners have to deviate in a small way from a performance standard in the zoning bylaw, there is a process called a minor variance application. And over time, there are some trends that have popped up in terms of minor variances that are frequently required for someone to develop their property in a desirable way. For example, a smaller side yard setback than the zoning bylaw may require. So we'll be looking at trends in minor variance history in the city and seeing if we can make any adjustments to the setbacks or other provisions in the zones to hopefully limit the number of minor variances that yourselves, other residents, and property developers have to go through. We'll also be reviewing the permitted uses in each zone. And specifically, we'll be looking at how institutional uses should be zoned, whether they should be in the institutional category, or, for example, schools are often located in residential zones. And continuing under the specific zones in the bylaw, there are several provisions that begin with the word notwithstanding, and these signal that there is a special exception for a particular property or a lot. However, there are many of them, and given the date of the bylaw, some of those notwithstanding or special exception provisions may no longer be necessary, and they will be reviewed alongside city staff to determine if those sites have been built out, if that permission should carry forward into the new bylaw. We'll also specifically review the manufacturing zones and permitted uses, as some of these are outdated and refer to zoning such as tanneries, which is no longer a typical or modern use. And there have also been legislative changes that affect some of the industrial zones, such as the Federal Cannabis Act. So the bylaw currently speaks to medical marijuana, industrial uses, manufacturing and processing. And this may warrant some changes as it's now legalized and not just for medical purposes. So those are a snapshot of some of the zoning issues that city staff and members of the TAC have raised with us. And I'll turn it over to Nadia to finish off the presentation and describe our next steps.
Thanks, Anita. So I also just want to highlight that zoning bylaws also assist with decks, with balconies, with air conditioning units. So it's not always, maybe redevelopment of a property, but it can deal with any structure that could be on a property, an accessory structure as a shed, your carport or a garage. So just think about all the elements that could go on your property. This is the tool, this is the document that is going to identify where the placement of those things can be. So I also want to just highlight that it's not always, the big house or the small house, but it could be other elements of the property. So in terms of next steps, what we have presented the full project process, and we have that on the display board, but in terms of the next 2.5 months, we will be having a discussion paper, so we are going to flush out the zoning issues that Anita has presented. We're going to, hopefully with your input tonight, and also based on our review of the policy documents and best practices, changes to legislation will be in that. And the public has the opportunity to review it as well. Anything that we produce as a draft document will be available for the public to review. It would also go to the TAC members first before we present it to the public. And we anticipate having another public open house late March, early April. With our public open houses for the project, we intend to have them in different locations across the city so that other people can participate in. So for the next one, we're anticipating to have it at the Benson Center. And following that public open house, we'll finalize that discussion paper based on input. And then we'll be preparing what is called a draft zoning strategy report. And that is going to be identifying key recommendations of how the zoning bylaw can be improved. So that 40+ year zoning bylaw, it's going to look different, it's going to read differently, it's going to be pretty, it's going to be accessible, it's going to have images, it's going to look modern, and so it's going to be a new document. So we will definitely want input on that, and that strategy report will include what it'll look like, some changes proposed, and again, that will be vetted through the city, of course, and the TAC and yourselves. So we put this here in case you would like to find out how your property is zoned. So this is on the city's website. This is, we have this map in large over on a board. We also will have laptops at future public open houses, so that way we can zoom in on your property, you can have one-on-one discussions. So we intend to have that available at future open houses. And you know, if you want to look at the map, I like paper, so if you want to ask one of us to help locate your property, we're happy to do that this evening. But you can also go online, and it is an interactive map that's available for the public. So we'd like you to stay involved. We have some door prizes, so that's a little incentive to come out. We have, we encourage all ages to participate. Can't start land use planning too early, in my opinion. Casper and I and our another colleague have gone out to kindergarten grade 1 classes to talk about community planning. So my daughter took away that I talk a lot because that's part of my job. And so, and that I use computers a lot. So she wants to be a vet so that she can just work with animals and not computers. But anyway, so we have created a project logo, which is in the top right corner. So any notifications that you see, anything that you see on the website, that is the brand identification for this project. And so this presentation, for example, the draft documents, future presentations will be on the city's website. We also have or the city has an email, planning@cornwall.ca. All of the comments that are received through this project will be documented by the city, and they will receive a response. So that is the email address. And the social media is going to be used as a means to communicate out of future meetings. Documents are available for review. It is not the tool that will be used to collect comments, but it's a means of sending information out. Of course, we have our newspaper notices and the various publications, community bulletins, so any way that we can get the message out. Tonight you have comment sheets, so we really encourage you to fill those out. And it may not be related to zoning. That's okay. We would like also feedback on tonight's meeting. What did you like? What didn't you like? Maybe there's information that you would like to learn more about that we need to consider for other public meetings. So those comment sheets are available for that. So if you could kindly fill those out. And in terms of your key city contact, it is Mary Joyce Smith. The email and her extension is there. So she is the prime city contact. When she goes on vacation, I suspect it will be Carl. But again, we're a team, so we work closely with the city, and we hope that you will get involved, and hope you will also share the news about this project with your friends, family, colleagues, other people that you work with.